happens. Hi,
Good morning.
I'm really excited about this because, one, I've wanted to talk to you for a very long time and get caught up. But second, because I think what you're doing on the eastern part of the state really resonates with what a group of us are doing on the western part of the state,
That's great.
which is like reviving humanity,
One person at a time.
right? Okay, so let's get this interview started. So we've started a new podcast series out of a couple of organizations that we have out here that I founded. And one of them is called Urban Roots and Ancient Wisdom. And we are doing a podcast series called We Are South Dakota to remind people about the humanity within people and to rehumanize us after being a tool and a toy for a lot of people around the country. And when we have a governor like we have, people forget that there are real people impacted by real policy that makes a difference in their lives.
Absolutely.
So why don't you begin? Introduce yourself to these folks out here. Tell them a little bit about you.
Well, my name is Tove Bormes. I grew up mostly in Rapid City, and my parents were military and retired out there. And so I grew up mostly in Rapid City. I've been East River since about 85 probably. I'm married 37 years next month.
Congratulations.
No kids by choice. Everybody asks that question. Oh my God, you don't have any kids? No, we don't. I have been a jack of all trades for most of my life. I like a challenge, shall we say. I am professionally trained as an attorney, still have a license to practice, don't do much of that. I was a college professor for a number of years, and then for about 18 years, we owned a Turkish rug store, and I went to Turkey 2-3 times a year every year. If you look at my passport, my husband and I were talking about this. We're going back this week, and just for fun this time. And I basically spent 2 of the last 10 years in Turkey with the amount of time I was there in my passport. Not officially, but piece by piece for sure. And I now work for the University of South Dakota. I represent the USD Knudsen School of Law as a fundraiser. I'm the director of development there.
You recently initiated a project that has gotten quite a bit of fanfare, shall we say, right? The media has picked it up. You started
a lot more than I ever expected. I will say that right now. Well, we had our 40th class reunion in August, and when we left there, I was chatting with my husband and said, just seems like we ought to be able to do something for the school. And my husband, who is freaking amazing, he always has the answer to everything, and he's almost always right. Don't tell him. Said, well, why don't you do something about lunch debt? And I thought that sounded like a really good idea. First of all, I hate the fact that the phrase lunch debt has a meaning. That should only mean that you missed 11sies. It should not mean that kids go without food, but there we are. And when we got back, I called the school district and got a hold of the nutrition program for Rapid City Stevens, or for the district, and said, hey, what's the situation? And the long story short is they have almost $200,000 in lunch debt. The good news is, and I was both surprised and extremely happy to hear, that Rapid City does not disallow students from eating or give them what I would call a shame lunch because mom hasn't paid her bill. So that's great news. The reality is that makes the district incur a whole bunch of lunch debt that in some circumstances, it's just simply not going to be able to be paid. And not because somebody was irresponsible. If you have to choose between the lights and the lunch, and you're pretty sure they're going to give you the lunch, you're probably going to pay the lights. I hate that that choice exists, but there it is.
Mhm.
So talk to them. They were beyond thrilled. I got the total for Stevens, which is a little over $10,000. And as long as I had her on the phone, I got about 5 more schools just in case somebody really wanted to be generous. I've learned you can both underestimate and overestimate people on things like that, but I would much rather go with the notion that maybe their people are going to be more charitable than I think. So,
And people stepped up.
yeah, absolutely. Of course, there's always somebody that's going to have something negative to say about it. And if I've learned one thing as a do-gooder, it's this. So be it. If you want to be mad at me because some kid gets to eat and the school district is able to continue to do that, so be it. This is that, such as life. But yeah, I mean, the response has been incredible. Our class really stepped up, and one of our classmates, you probably know, Mary Curry, stepped in, total surprise, out of the blue, sent me a note on the side and said, keep doing what you're doing, and whatever you don't cover, I'll pick up.
Isn't that great?
Which is amazing and
Yeah.
completely unexpected.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I had a bunch of questions for her because that was a phenomenal thing to say.
Yeah.
And she lives in California and has a company called Mango Math that she's been in education forever, and said, South Dakota just turned down $7 million. We have $6 million in lunch debt and $7 million in funds that we don't need for nutrition. I think we should be doing something about that. So
Yeah.
I was very thrilled to have her join us with that.
We know that the national public, so I did a little research, before we did this morning, and national public school meal debt is $262 million a year. So $262 million a year for
Wow.
about 30 million students can't afford their school lunches. That's insane. And you think that if you're not prioritizing hungry kids, then where are your priorities?
Absolutely. Isn't that just the nutshell?
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be the first thing we need? I mean, just forget the basic humanity of the question. If you're sending kids to school hungry, it impacts their learning. I mean,
Right.
this isn't rocket science. You don't even have to feel bad for the kids. If you want to educate them and you want to turn out your best students at the end of the game, you have to make sure that they have the tools when they get there to be able to learn. And first on that list is sleep and food.
Right.
It's not rocket science.
Exactly. So I think it's a common sense notion to understand, and the research supports it, that receiving free or reduced price school lunches reduces food insecurity, obesity rates, poor health. And man, when kids are hungry, the only thing you can think about is the fact that you're hungry. You can't do anything else.
Yeah.
It's
also true that cognitively it turns your brain off.
Yep.
You
go to lizard brain, right? You go to survival mode.
Yep.
Yeah. You have a great representative over there in Minnehaha County. You probably know her, Caden Whitman, right?
Yes.
From District 15.
Yep. Caden and Aaron and Don Marie Johnson. And frankly, Sioux Falls is a good place to be that way.
It is. You get the good representatives. We get the great beauty of the hills, right?
Yep. There you go.
So I don't know if you know, last year, Caden brought a bill forward, HB 1221, so 1221. And it was a bill to provide free school lunches for South Dakota's K through 12 students. And the bill failed 14-1 vote in the House Education Committee, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And interestingly, opposition came from the Education Secretary, Joe Graves,
Mm-hmm.
and then Jim Bolin, who's a senator out of Canton, who's a former teacher.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully
Well, Annie, you're making a mistake here, and that's thinking that any of this is ever going to make sense. I've been, I used to teach state and local government, and I learned fairly early on that it was going to be darn hard if you're going to teach this subject in South Dakota to rationalize your way through what it is we do.
right.
We're
So
not.
we're providing meals for people that are incarcerated,
Mhm.
but not for kids that are under our care, our public care,
Mhm.
during 7-8 hours a day of the school week, right?
Mhm.
And what's interesting, so there's been a lot of this controversy about, like, the state had a $96 million surplus this year, and yet the budgetary impact of that school lunch program would have been about $38 million.
Mhm.
So what are your thoughts in sitting in Minnehaha County, who's really, you're shifting over there? Even your mayor, who's a Republican and pretty well known, fairly staunch in some conservative ideology, has made a shift toward, like, affordable housing and making an investment in that. What do you see shifting over on the eastern part of the state? Because you and I've lived here all of our lives for the most part. I was gone for 30 years, but we're from
Mhm.
here. We're long-term families.
Right.
And people have always said, well, you're a red state. And I always remind people that when you look at the number of people registered to vote, and then you look at the people that turn out to vote,
Right.
people like the Christie Nome are not getting the large percentage of the voters of the state,
Right.
because we
Right.
have such a voter suppression that goes on here through bullying tactics like this. So
Mm-hmm.
you guys have made a shift, and it feels like, to me, things are actually shifting, that people are coming to understand that they really can make a difference, such as what you initiated, one person reaching out to their pals to make a really significant impact in people's lives.
I didn't know we would get to talk about this today, Annie, because I have a lot of theories about this.
This
I
is why I
taught
wanted to
political
talk to
science
you.
for a long time. I will tell you, having been, I was a kid that when Watergate was on, 8-year-old Tova was glued to the TV. Both of my parents thought it was very odd behavior, but it was also their fault because I wasn't allowed to watch TV growing up unless it was public television, and that's what was on. So I've been kind of up to my eyeballs in politics my whole life. Enough so that I remember the politics of South Dakota in the 70s, in the 80s, and even into the 90s, where we had I mean, we've always been a red state, quote unquote, but we had always had a really good, loyal opposition to the Republican Party. And the Republican Party and the Democratic Party were able to function together and for the good of the people. And that has slowly eroded, and on steroids the last few years. But we no longer have that. That has been stripped out of our politics in South Dakota, to our detriment,
Mm-hmm.
because you know we don't live in a black and white world.
Mm-hmm.
There are very few things that are just duh.
Mm-hmm.
There just aren't that many of them. Most of them need nuanced thought, and I think that's what you see, um, in Sioux Falls is a willingness to view the nuances of things and look at the bigger picture. Um, Not to put words in Paul Hankins' mouth. Yes, I am a Republican, but I am also aware that a large portion of the population of the city I live in, particularly high school kids, um, are not from particularly affluent circumstances.
Mhm.
Um, right now, I would say, I may be wrong on this, so I guess you're going to quote me, but with a caveat, I think about 70% of the kids in Sioux Falls School District right now qualify for free lunch.
Mm.
Okay. Well, that is a shifting, dramatically shifting demographic
Mm.
in Sioux Falls. And here's the thing, that's true across South Dakota.
Mm.
It's just that Sioux Falls is viewing that maybe in a different way and
Mm.
trying to approach it in a different way. That is our workforce. These first generation kids are the people that are going to grow up to become our workforce, to become our next generation of college students. And we would be well served to serve them well.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I think that's a lot of what is driving what might be seen as some people as Sioux Falls being far more progressive than most places. It really isn't about progressive or not progressive. It's about looking at the reality of the people who populate your state and then doing your best by them. Forget party.
It sounds as though that there's some values that you hold to be true that you can see rooted in a lot of this.
Mm-hmm,
So I'll give you an example. You went to Stevens, I went to St. Martin's.
mm-hmm. Well, I went
And
to St. Martin's till they kicked me out.
I should say you graduated from
There
Stevens.
you go.
We'll have to talk about being extracted from Catholic schools on a later conversation.
My husband said half the reason he married me is he found out that I refused to back down on my abortion paper to a nun. And that was the end of me. Yeah, I've been this way a long time. That's what I'll say.
and we're very proud of who you are.
Thank you.
You know, one of the reasons that I wanted to start this and start doing interviews with people is I got really frustrated with sound bites. You know, I've lived in politics for almost 40 years,
Yeah.
and the world of sound bites doesn't tell the whole story. And I think under these sound bites are these incredible values. We have a common friend, Tom Willock, who
Mm-hmm.
he says to me, he says that the reason he was inspired to continue on with the guitar when he and I used to play guitar together.
Mm-hmm.
I barely remember that. I might have been drunk at the time, but truth. It's these little things though that inspire people to do really substantial things in our community. And when you hear nothing but bullying and all the bad things that are happening, all the shit that's happening, right? I don't know
Mm-hmm.
if you heard Howard Stern lately. I love Howard Stern. I love good radio. So, you know, Howard Stern said, you know, if I'm woke, if you're going to call me woke because I believe in the truth and I believe in saying that Donald Trump should never be president, and and if
Mm-hmm.
that makes me woke, that I'm not asleep to what's going on in my community, then I'm cool with that, man.
I gotta tell you, Eddie, the funniest thing in the world to me is that woke has become pejorative.
Right,
What the hell is wrong with paying attention?
right, right,
Don't pay. It's as though the whole world is shouting, pay no attention to the man behind the screen.
right, 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 right.
You know,
So,
it's insane.
so if you're going to start organizing your friends, which you already did,
Mm-hmm.
right? Have you thought about taking this further?
Well, that's what I do all day, every day for the University of South Dakota. Um, and here's what I find. People are incredibly charitably inclined, given the right explanation.
Mm-hmm.
There's something, Steve Hildebrand, who I'm sure you're aware of, created something called a Promising Futures Fund. Um, it is aimed and I sponsored a classroom for him a few years ago and have continued to do so because selfishly, I'll admit it, at the end of the year, I get a packet of 25 thank you notes from second graders. And I wait all year for the packet. It's the greatest thing ever. Truly, I saw what he was doing and went, damn straight, because a kid that can't read is a kid that can't succeed, period. And he started this in that small way. It just keeps growing bigger and bigger and bigger. It's targeted at the schools and the kids that are most likely to fall through the cracks.
Mm-hmm.
And I love the idea. And I really love the extension he has put to that, where he is now taking middle school kids, mostly first generation. They've never been to college. Nobody in their family's been to college. And he is putting them in buses and taking them to SDSU and down to USD and to my alma mater, USD Law, and putting these kids into these places and saying, you can't. You are entitled to dream big.
Yeah.
And I love that, because you can't fix everything for every kid. You can't. And I wish we could, but you can't. The one thing you can give them is the opportunity to see themselves differently than they do today.
Mm-hmm.
And fast forward, I sat down with a attorney and his wife who wanted to make a gift to the university. And they had been exposed to the Promising Futures Fund and thought it was a great program. And I said, well, hey, why don't we design something that's targeted at those kids, and we can write a scholarship that helps those kids get to college. And we added a second portion of it that if you make it all the way through and you want to go to law school, we're going to scholarship you there too. So if you start at freshman year, freshman year, that all you have to do is stay the course and get accepted because you have money over here to do the next thing.
Mm-hmm.
You have to let people dream. And that's what we called it. It's the Dare to Dream Scholarship.
Mm. I have these,
Good.
I know of 5 kids right now, 5 kids. So they're under the age of 30. And right. 5 kids. And they want to go to law school.
Yeah.
And they're all like, but Annie, I can't. I'm like, why can't you? They said, well, I can't afford my life and go to law school. And then I read in the newspaper, we're way behind. We need so many attorneys in the state of South Dakota and so far behind. And I think that opportunity to dream is part of this, what you're talking about, right? That oppression and suppression that occurs out of whether you're being bullied at school over lunches, or it's just an unconscious bias within inside of yourself that I don't know of anybody that's ever succeeded. I don't know of anybody. I'm crazy. I can't dream that big. I don't even know what a big dream looks like.
That was me. Absolutely true. That was me. I very fortunately, I get to plug him again, but it's true. I very fortunately married somebody who went, you have no idea of your own power. Let's go get this thing. And he pushed me to go back to school. I had dropped out of college 3 times by this point, pushed me to go back to school. And I hold the distinction. I think I may be the only one that can say this. I hold the distinction of having been on academic probation and the 4-point dean's list at the same time for 3 semesters. It's my GPA when I came back. I had 54 credits of F on my GPA when I came back to school. So I had 3 semesters of retaking classes that I had already taken to remove all of this stuff and get my GPA high enough. I only took as many as I was going to have to take to get my GPA over a 3-point so I could get into law school. So I never did graduate with the miracle GPA, but I did well enough to get it to where it needed to be to go to law school, and off we went. But, my parents were amazing, but they didn't have any experience that way. Neither one of my parents went to college. My mom had a teaching certificate, but they didn't go to college. They didn't know what that looked like. And so there were so many things that were setting me up as a kid without anybody doing anything wrong, to never see myself in that capacity.
Hmm.
And boy, it's a big reason I took the job that I took with the university, is that I know what it looks like to look in at that thing and go, I wonder.
Mm-hmm.
But seeing all of the obstacles, there's money, there's intellect, there's experience, there's, you know, not knowing the rules.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many social cues and rules
Mm-hmm.
around this kind of stuff that
Mm-hmm.
as a first gen kid, you just don't know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, I get it.
And, the, and those kinds of things are solved one person at a time. You
Mm-hmm.
know, you can
Mm-hmm.
put the mechanisms in place, but they're solved one person at a time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think of how fortunate I was to leave here and go to Los Angeles and then live in Phoenix for years and then come back
Mm-hmm.
here. And so I have that great experience of having been other places, having seen other things, but then coming back here, I don't have that capacity to slow down. And I'm frequently disappointed because I have these incredible expectations of us as human beings.
Yes.
I I really, I don't know if you remember Sister Joan. Sister Joan, I
Mm-hmm.
always credit Sister Joan with being the reason that I ended up becoming a Buddhist, because she taught us that. She taught us about, Islam and Judaism
Mm-hmm.
and Buddhism and Confucianism and all of that. And people are like,
Yep.
you learned from a Catholic nun? Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And it was because of those three nuns that, I actually survived life, because they really raised me. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm still in touch with her today, but she encouraged me, and I don't know
Mm-hmm.
what other people's experience was, but she encouraged me, a kid that, man, I hated high school, I didn't fit in, I've never fit in anywhere, to say you can do anything that you want to do. And when I finally got married, I don't know how old I was, maybe 55, I finally got married.
Mm-hmm.
And when we got married, the two of us, so here's two Catholic girls, two girls raised Catholic, went out to Sister Joan and said, look, this is where we're at. And this is what she
Mm-hmm.
said. Are you happy? Yeah. Do you love each other? Yeah. Then go have a great life, build a great life. That full circle around.
I think most people who are not Catholic would be surprised by sisters
Yeah.
because and Catholic education in many ways, because you would struggle to teach a class on comparative religion in a high school pretty much anywhere in America today, but that wouldn't be unusual at all in a Catholic school
Mm-hmm.
because the especially the Jesuit tradition has always been a very broad thinking, the more you know kind of way of looking at things. So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So I don't want to take up all your Sunday. I
no,
love that
it's
we get
okay.
to have this chat. It's cool.
Yeah.
So I want to close with this notion of one of my personal goals is to activate humanity throughout South Dakota, because
Mhm.
I really believe in the people of South Dakota. I believe that you cannot live here with your feet on the ground and be affected by this most sacred area
Mhm.
of the oldest geological rock formations in the world, up in, where they carved those four stony guys, and
Mhm.
this amazing landscape that we have, right? That provides truly sustenance through food and a lifestyle, a way of living that is amazing. And yet
Mhm.
it's a state that has incurred the most tragic of horrendous um
Mhm.
violence,
Mhm.
right? That still occurs. I mean, there's still genocide that goes on here with the oppression within the reservations and urban Indian settings and all of that. And so I think it lands on people's shoulders without people realizing it. And so it
Absolutely.
requires us to put one more rock in our backpack and straighten up and be determined, be intentional about moving forward. Speak to that. The philosopher in you.
Well, I will tell you, in 2006, I am full-blooded German Russian from the steppes of Ukraine. And in 2006, my mom and my sisters and I went back to Ukraine and walked the walk of our ancestors, those that survived. Um, you were talking about the palpable impact that you can feel. It is part of the undercurrent of the land. That same undercurrent, I know exactly what you're talking about because because I grew up here, I had not connected that way until I went to Ukraine. And I said to my sisters, I feel like somebody, the ancestor of somebody who survived Auschwitz, walking around
Mm.
in this place. You know, most of my ancestors fled, those that didn't died either in the Bolshevik Revolution or in the Holodomor or in World War II. Nobody survived that. And I watch Ukraine right now, and it's devastating to me because that land has been a land of grief for millennium, and we have some of that here too. And I think it impacts the way people live because there's that fear that is constantly. It's almost I hate this phrase, but it's almost a trauma response to everything around you. And boy, um, I think that's present here. And I see that in the fear cells. And so much of what underpins the I'll just say the craziness of politics in South Dakota is fear.
Mm.
Um, boy, I wish there was an easy way to undo that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that there is, but to that I say the fact that you don't have the answer doesn't mean you can get to stop trying.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for many people, um, they think that because they can't do everything, then they're absolved from doing anything. And I think we have to combat that in ourselves. That's, I think, one of the hardest things that we learn as humans is that we are responsible for our brother.
Mm-hmm.
We are. And sometimes if you're willing to be that person, it's going to come with some negative things coming back at you. It just is. Um, and you have to shoulder those and keep moving because it's the only way, you know? I think there is incredible, uh, if you give people an opportunity to do the right thing, most people do. They will rise up and do it, but they don't think that way always for themselves, you know? And it doesn't make them bad people. It means they're interested in or they're paying attention to other things, you know? I don't have kids. I have the luxury of being able to think in big senses about things and say, hey, it's stupid that there's lunch debt. If I was a working mom who was waiting tables, I don't have time to worry about other kids' lunch debt. I don't.
Exactly. Exactly. Exactly.
I have the privilege of being able to say, there's an obstacle I didn't have to overcome. Who can I help overcome it? And we can never forget that the finances of the thing should not be a barrier.
Mm-hmm.
There are people out there in the world that have the money
Mm-hmm.
that if you ask them will
Mm-hmm.
help.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time, things fall apart because nobody has the courage to say, can you help?
Mm-hmm.
And we just have to have the courage to ask each other, to trust in each other enough to say, please,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
Um, this whole thing with the school lunch thing, I mean, this was a conversation with my husband sitting in the recliners going, what should we do? There should be a thing. Do this. Okay. So I threw it out there and asked, and in 24 hours,
Mm-hmm.
um, I had the basically, not that I want to shoulder her with all of it, but I had somebody that was going to basically take care of the debt.
Mm-hmm.
That was beautiful. Then it started catching, and I said something about it on Facebook and immediately got attacked for tooting my own horn. God, whatever. But here's a cool thing. I said it, then it got picked up. And since then, I've had calls from people all over the US going, yeah, that's a great idea. I wonder if I could make that happen. Well, I didn't ask any of these people for anything. They just saw an idea and said, I'm willing to ask. And being willing to ask is 90% of the game.
Mm-hmm.
It really
Being
is.
willing, just being willing.
Yeah. And you know what? If you ask and you don't get anywhere with it, okay, so find the next thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard not to get disheartened sometimes, but you got to move forward and figure out the next thing. And I think the hardest thing, Annie, is to stay soft, stay malleable. Don't let the hurts in the world shut you down, because the world kicks. It just does. And people question your how and your why, and all of the things that can be questioned get questioned. And you just, if it's important to you, you got to stay soft, stay open to criticism, take it for what it's worth. Sometimes the critics say something that can inform what you're doing. You got to be willing to do that too. You know, it's hard to be open, but it's the only way.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's hard for me to not bring this up before we close.
Mm-hmm.
I really believe that where we are today is so similar to back in the 50s and the 60s, that we've come back around again. And we're having to face the same things. And I was fortunate to have a mentor in John Lewis, Congressman John Lewis. And I think of Congressman John Lewis, right?
Hold on. Moment of reverence. I've read everything he's ever written.
Yeah, I
didn't know who he was. That's how ill-served I was in my education. I didn't know who he was until I started digging in, teaching political science, and I about fell about the room.
Yeah.
What an extraordinary human.
I can remember sitting in his office in DC, and him, such a great storyteller, and saying that because somebody had asked him about, did they have a permit for Selma, Alabama? And he'd said, and I can't do what he did justice by any means, but basically, if we'd waited for permission or to ask for permission or a permit, it never would have happened. And actually, are you going to ask the people who are the oppressors, who at the end of the day beat the hell out of him?
Yeah.
Within an inch of his life, right? And so many other people, ask for permission to do what is right and humane and should have been rectified years and years before. And I think about that in everything that is going on here. I think about it in the terms of mining. I think about it in school lunch programs and beating up trans kids and all of these issues, these these cultural wars that are going on. Right? Because you had what you had, and and I never had a closet to come out of. I just always was me. Right. and I said at the school board the other day, I said, look, I'm going to be 60 years old, and we're back talking about whether or not we're going to have a debate on whether or not gay people are human or not. And are we going to treat people that are different humanely? Are we really doing this all over again? And it feels as though we're at that time again, which requires good people to step up. And the failure to do that, the failure to step forward is more egregious than stepping forward and making a mistake. That note that Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King said in Selma and in Birmingham, right? That the silence of my friends is more deafening than the angry words of my enemies.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. You know, um, it's one thing to have convictions. If there isn't any courage that goes with them, it's not a conviction.
And you don't get the courage until you give the willingness, are just willing to step up and begin walking forward. And in the midst of that, of confronting your own fears, you find courage.
Annie, I have a friend, Thea Miller Ryan, who is one of the most remarkable people you will ever meet. You two have got to meet.
Okay.
She used to work for the state of South Dakota. She ran the outdoor campus. And Thea is the sweetest, kindest, soft-spoken, gentle human. She just doesn't have a big, mean, aggressive bone in her body. In other words, we're two sides of the same coin. Yeah. Nothing like me at all, which is why we make great friends. She called me one day at work and I could hear it in her voice. She was absolutely torn up. What's going on? Tove had made this paper rainbow buffalo and put it in the window at the outdoor campus. And she used to make all kinds of, she's a lady who cuts up construction paper and makes cute things for kids. She put it up in the window. I think it was during Pride Month. And a woman came in and lost her mind over this buffalo. The next thing you know, and Thea was running this for the state of South Dakota, and this is a big facility, both sides of the state. She had the governor, she had the mayor of Sioux Falls, she had everybody in an uproar. And Thea said, I'm not taking it down. What happens if I don't take it down? And I said, Thea, you're going to get fired. They can do that. And I wish it was different, but you can't bring anything that is perceived as political into your workplace. You're going to get fired if you do it. And she said, what should I do? And I said, you're going to be more effective. Stay right where you are, take it down, and let's blow this thing up. And you can't turn sideways in South Dakota 5 years later without that flipping rainbow buffalo covering everything around you.
Yeah.
If the lady could have shut up for one rainbow buffalo, there would have been one, and a month later it would have been gone. Now there's probably 100,000 of them, because
we didn't even know we were going to talk about this, right?
There you go. Well, that's where it came from. As soon as it happened, Thea and her friend, and unbeknownst to her, she and her friend made a sticker. And unbeknownst to her, my friend Walter Ports made a sticker. And between the two of them, over the course of a weekend, we sold about 700 of them. Sent the money to Pride Sioux Falls. And since then, they're everywhere. T-shirts, there's pins, there's clings, and they're all over the world. I sent them to Turkey, I sent them to Australia, I sent them to New Zealand. People were contacting me that I've never seen in my life. So I hope that lady's happy.
The unintended consequences.
Absolutely.
Right.
And sometimes the best fight is that fight.
Yeah.
Okay. You want to bring this that way? Then we're going to do exactly what you said. But you can't stop me over here. She doesn't work there anymore. She runs the Osher Lifelong Learning Center for South Dakota. Nice. She's a great lady. And we absolutely took somebody's hate and turned it into something amazing. Thea's just a rock star. It has really struggles sometimes, I think, with the meanness of South Dakota. She's been here all her life. We were talking one day about driving. She grew up in Pierre, and we were talking about driving, and she said something about being a bad driver. And she said, but Bill Jankel is the one that taught me to drive. It's my favorite stories for Thea. It's just fantastic. But I mean, she grew up in in an incredibly Republican world. And this is just, I mean, that's who her family was. Her dad was a lobbyist for 50 years, and he's a great guy. Thea just didn't have any choice but to depart from what she knew and what she grew up with because it was getting so ugly. She said, Tove, I don't remember it being that way.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember it
Yeah.
being that way.
Yeah.
But it is now.
I just had a conversation with a good friend yesterday about that. And she said, you know, when John Thune came out and said that you need automatic weapons to deal with the varmints and the prairie dogs in South Dakota, that was it. That was just you went too far. You just and which I think is funny after everything else, but that was the thing that was just too far.
Yes.
And because it is, there's no truth to it. It is completely insane. And there's no humanity. There's no humanity.
And the worst part of it is that,
and I hate prairie dogs.
He knows that.
He does. That's the whole point. That's the whole point.
You get to a place where you are, when you find yourself stuck saying things that you don't want to be saying. That's, I don't know.
The hypocrisy.
That's a bridge too far for me. Hence, I got kicked out of Catholic school.
Yeah. Congratulations. I got kicked out of Catholic college. You got kicked out of Catholic high school. We've turned out to be just hellaciously fierce women.
There you go.
We live the model that well-behaved women will never make history.
Oh, that is true.
Right?
Plus, God, wouldn't that be boring?
Yeah.
If you just spent your whole life,
I know people are going to think that you and I talk every single day, and I don't think you and I have actually had a conversation in 40 years, probably.
Probably longer. Yeah.
And this has just been the best Sunday morning chat that I've had in years.
Thank you. Thank you. I thoroughly enjoyed it as well, Annie. I watch you from afar, and it's fun to watch what you're accomplishing.
Well,
it really is.
You know, ditto. And congratulations to you, and hats off to all of the people that made such a difference in kids' lives. Right. And I know that they'll continue to do that. It's going to continue to grow across the country. And let's do another big project together. I love you, my friend.
Deal. Love you too. Thank you.
All right. Be well.
Bye-bye.
All right.
Hey, everybody. I'm really excited about all these opportunities that we have coming forward. There's so many fun and incredible people out there, and we're going to interview as many as we can. So if you know of somebody that you want their story out there, let's spend some time together. Let's introduce each other. Let's ignite the best in humanity.